Okay, let's talk about sort of not directly Heidegger yet. For one thing, there are no more paper topics to pass out because we met twice and decided we couldn't think of any promising paper topics that would lead you into deep things in either, not that there aren't lots of interesting things, but it's just either something that I'm going to explain or that is too hard to explain. So anyway, there are plenty of interesting paper topics you already got. And in a way, this has a big advantage because that means you can start working on your papers right now. There's not everything that you need to write your papers has been covered, and we're going on from there. Maybe what we're saying now hopefully might cast retroactive light on these topics. But anyway, the main thing is start working on your papers. And we will go on. Today, I'm almost going to finish basic questions. I'd be surprised if I got it completely finished. But nonetheless, near enough so that the subject for next week is the way back into the ground of metaphysics, the next thing on the syllabus. And that's what we'll have a time and a half on. And then we'll be on to the age of the world picture, while you're still thinking about the first, either the origin of the work of art or the beginning part of this. So that's the first thing. I take it that, that I've been told that is it hard for you to get onto the news group part of the website because you have to have your own password and your name? Has that been a problem for anybody? Jennifer has apparently put on something that explains even more clearly. Has anybody actually tried to write something in the correspondence? Because we're surprised nobody writes any questions there. It may just mean that sections and office hours do the job so well that there's no job for this thing, but there is this place to write down your questions and answer each other's questions, and Liz is ready to oversee it, and I'm ready to contribute to it if I can. So anyway, but it isn't a problem anyway, I gather, of technology. So, okay. So now you know the reader, maybe you don't know, the reader is ready to be picked up at Copy Central across Bancroft. It's got the way back into the ground of metaphysics, an important part of a book by Borgman that we'll need when we do the question concerning technology. It's rather slim, and it costs $8.70 because of this permissions business, which I take it Chicago or Cambridge, one or the other, or both, charged a lot of money for these little pieces. For those of you who don't want to buy the reader, I will put one on reserve in the philosophy library, and you can certainly Xerox it from there or read it there. Maybe instead of putting it, I could put it on a. No, I'll just put it on reserve. That's all I can do. Okay. Anything else? Let's see what else. When you do read The Way Back into the Ground of Metaphysics for next time, don't worry about the places where he's talking about being in time, unless, of course, you've had being in time, in which case that will be illuminating to you. But it isn't something that you need to know about to go on. It casts a retrospective light on being in time and shows how Heidegger wants to read it from this stage. He's always retroactively reinterpreting it. But if you haven't read Being in Time, just skip those parts. Okay, now we're ready to go forward. So we come back every once in a while into this thing that he sort of leaves like a bomb in the background that we don't know what it means yet, that Plato on 58 has given a consequential, influential, and disastrous philosophical definition in Western thinking. And I used to think it was something about the constant presence of the ideas. It may well be, but in this essay he doesn't stress that at all. He stresses rather, and we'll see, that it wasn't so much what Plato said, but what the early people, particularly the pre-Socratics and Plato, didn't say, didn't problematize, didn't interrogate, that got us off into the direction which leads to the bad things that are going on to us, happening to us now. He goes through a real quick story about that on page 61, but I will just but that's the constant present story, which I just said that we don't, I think, he doesn't develop. So let's go in a different direction, and in the direction that he does develop. First, but I do want to say, before we start telling us what they did right and what they left out and what we have to do, which is the three big subjects for today, you have to think a sort of ahead. He's leaving sort of hints along the way what the disaster is that we've now got. Well, I take it that the symptoms of the disaster are that historiography has completely squeezed out history. We have no sense anymore of the kind of thing he's trying to tell us about, our changing style or our changing understanding of the being of being. All we have is facts about the past. We also have the problem that there's no new God, that means nothing does the job of the work of art anymore that holds up meaningful differences to people. And all of this, he says, is because the truth as unconcealing got pushed out by a total concern for truth as correctness. I'll read you places where he says these things. These are all things he sort of is constantly saying, but sort of always in the background. And, okay, the new God story is on page 80, and the historiography too. This is sort of a funny slant on the disaster. We can therefore defend ourselves against the inundations of historiography. Today the tide is rising higher and higher, only by that we're jumping out of history, although we will gain dominion over historiography solely by winning back the power to take up historical being. The loss of this power is neither accidental nor an isolated process. Instead, it belongs together most intimately with the event in Western history which Hölderlin was the first to suffer and genuinely experience, in which Nietzsche expressed in his own way by pointing out that Western man has, for the last 2 millennia, been unable to fashion for himself a God. I mean, that's just a special case of the fact that we don't anymore have the sort of style and relation to the style that enables poets and statesmen and so forth to make works of art. It's interesting, it just occurs to me, it occurred to me in reading it, but I might as well say it. It occurred to me in another place where it was even clearer. I think he's gone away already since the origin of the work of art, where people think, when he talked about a statesman that would start a whole new understanding of being and so forth, that he might have had in mind Hitler. Well, by this point, which is only a year later, isn't this 36 or 37? 37, 2 years later. I mean, it's clear that he doesn't think any artist or thinker, or except maybe him, but certainly no statesman or anybody else has this ability to be a new work of art or be a new God or found a new understanding of being or a new understanding of the state. So that's how bad things have become. At the bottom of 80, he says, if once there were gods, who are now in flight from man, as they have been for ages, then this self-refusal of the gods must be a terrible occurrence, which surely sets in motion a singular event which we can hardly risk naming. And then comes the passing of the last god. I don't know what that is. That's from this book, Von Ereignis, which I'm still trying to get you a piece of. That's a book which comes out in 38, a big book, which is being translated and is going to come out in December. And I just wrote another email letter to say, can't you send me the page proofs, and then I'll show my class, say 30 pages of it, and then they'll all want to buy it, and so forth. It would be fun to be able to get that, which is what's got to do. He has a whole section on the last god, but we don't know what that is. But it's part of the disaster. And another place on 108.
81.
What?
They want to know what page you're talking
Oh, I was talking about 81, top of 81. And now I'm on 108. And that's just about how historiography stands in the way of history. Historiography is a narcotic averting us from history. And all of this, and I said, is because correspondence takes over. And if you believe that correspondence is just making true propositions about the facts, then you've lost the sense of the clearing, you've lost the sense of real history as the changing clearing, and you've lost a sense of the possibility of a work of art that would focus the current clearing. All of this is gone when correspondence takes over, as he says at the bottom of 105. Because they did not raise the question of the essence of aletheia, we'll come back to that, because for the Greeks aletheia remained primordial and unquestioned, therefore the determination of truth as correctness, which was actually grounded upon it, namely aletheia, could gain an ascendancy over aletheia and thrust it aside, and could by itself dominate the subsequent history of thought. That's why we're in such trouble. And one more way of putting it, I tell you all this mainly so you'll have in mind, because he keeps wanting you to have in mind, that there's some current problem that he's writing out of. That he's not, keep saying, just doing this out of curiosity or to show off or because he wants to write something new in philosophy, but that there's some real bad thing has happened to us, something disastrous, and that he's trying to help us understand it and eventually fix it. So there's another quick run-through of all the disasters on page 122. This time, it turns out that because, he doesn't put it quite this way, but he sort of, we are not anymore, we don't understand ourselves anymore as preservers, because we don't have any sense of the clearing, we don't have works of art. Therefore, we understand ourselves as rational animals. And that understanding ourselves as rational is just another way that this story of correctness occludes our being able to have any access to what gives us, really, what finally gives us meaningful differences and makes life worth living. So here he's attacking that at the second paragraph, second sentence. Reason assumes for itself the planning, constructing, and making of the world. Now, I read that to you partly because that's what the Age of the World picture is all about. This whole paragraph predicts what we're going to read next, where I mean not quite next, because I like the way back into the ground as part of this sort of meta problem, but that is sort of this big view. But as soon as we plunge in and start looking at the stages of decline in the history of the West, then there's a lot about how reason becomes planning, constructing, and making of the world. Beings are no longer physis in the Greek sense, but nature, that which is captured in the planning and projects of calculation and placed in the chains of anticipatory reckoning. Reason now becomes ever more rational, and all beings turn out to be contrivances. That's a funny word. How do you translate that for us?
I'll have to look it up.
I don't know, but it means I think devices would be Borgmann's word for it. Let's try devices. It means technological thing, but contrivance is such a contrived word. We must have a simpler word. I think devices will do. Okay, it turned out to be devices. This word understood in the essential and not in a derogatory way. Well, that's fine. I mean, devices are not bad things. It's just that there's more to the world than lots of electronic gadgets and so forth. Man becomes ever more inventive and clever, but at the same time more common and smaller. That's this constant thinking about the leveling of the important differences. Nothing serious, nothing matters, and as this process goes on. And it ends where we are. And did you notice this? You probably didn't, because you're not looking for it. At the top of page 4, in the current mood, if you're going to be doing philosophy, the mood that Heidegger's in is a mood which he calls, which gets translated restrained at the top of 4, Verhaltenheit. I think that's an okay translation. In it, two elements originally belonging together and ours one, terror in the face of what is closest and most obtrusive, and namely that beings are, and awe in the face of what is remotest, namely that in beings and therefore each being. Remotest, namely that in beings and before each being holds sway. Okay, now the terror is the interesting thing. I mean, the Greeks didn't have that. That's what you have in the face of a world where there are no gods, where everything has become equally flat and where all you got is devices and everybody's busy ordering and controlling everything. Heidegger thinks that's terrible. Terror is probably not a good word for it. We came up with a better word for it when we were talking about it among the TAs. I think it's something like frantic disorientation is what he thinks people are in now. And thinkers are not only, well, they've got one foot in frantic disorientation but thinkers also have one foot in awe, where awe does not mean what it means later in the book. I'll come back to that. Here, awe means, they're two different German words. The translator is completely horrible in this respect. I mean, I don't know how often he does it. This is the only bad time I've noticed. I mean, awe turns out later to be a kind of very different than wonder. We'll get to that. Here, awe is very close to wonder. It is, the German word is Scheue. And it's got to do with the kind of modesty and fear. But fear in the sense of God. It's what you'd feel in the face of God in the Old Testament. You feel something so important with such power and authority that you feel
Shy.
what?
Shy.
Shy. Yeah, well, that's the literal translation. You feel shy in the face of it. That's the German. But what could that be? S-H-E-U. How is it?
S-C-H.
S-C-H-E-U-E.
No,
just
yeah.
Shy. Okay, that's shy. Okay, did you feel sort of a kind of amazing, respectful fear in the face of it, something like that? Yeah, John.
Yeah, I'm kind of shy off from the reading you just gave of this paragraph. Are you saying that he's here calling into question, or saying that our current mode of understanding of philosophy, that disposition is restraint, or because it seems to be saying that this basic disposition of futural philosophy should be, and you affirm it, should be restrained.
Well, you mean nobody's got that yet, you think? Oh, I think he's doing future philosophy, but I'm not sure. It's certainly not anybody else but Heidegger.
In this paragraph, he's calling for either the retrieval of this disposition, or attempting to make it possible, right?
Well,
we currently have restraint.
Well, we don't, but I think Heidegger does. I think, but it doesn't matter. I mean, so don't feel that I just want to tell everybody that it matters much whether Heidegger's already one of the future people and he's got it, or whether Heidegger sees that this is what he would like to have and what future thinkers will have. It's got certainly to do with what it would be to be a thinker in the face of the terrible situation terrible in the sense of terrifying situation that we're in. And certainly Heidegger has got something. He thinks, back in touch with the pre-Socratics on the one hand, and the mess and he's more in touch with the situation we're in on the other than any other philosopher or anything else, I think. That he's the thinker who's going to go, I'll jump ahead to what was going to be a kind of punchline. Notice, I'm sure Heidegger thinks he's a thinker. Or you question that?
No, I think I just misunderstood. I thought you were saying that Heidegger thinks that what we currently have.
Oh, I see.
We're in this basic position.
No, I'm good. I'm very glad because maybe other people thought that too. No, we are in the terror part, only we don't know it. But we're already frantic and disoriented, but we don't sense it. And we certainly don't have this shy fear in the face of something great which is happening there too, that we are unaware of it. Only Heidegger senses that. In the jargon of later stuff, only Heidegger senses that technology is itself a mode of givenness and has a kind of fearful gratitude even for technology. That's far ahead of where we are. Okay. Now, so our task is to go back, given this, and figure out or understand what the Greeks saw and what they left out on 124. This is sort of connecting up now to about where we were. The last paragraph. The primordial history of the essence of truth gives rise to truth as the essence of beings themselves as unconcealedness. Remember, that's Dreyfus. This primordial positing of the essence, which is the task assigned to the beginning of the beginning, that's the pre-Socratics, excludes an inquiry into aletheia itself. It is now clear that this lack of questioning originated out of a necessity to present, to preserve, and to unfold once and for all beings in their beingness. So that was the Greeks' job. And our job is to ask about what was still concealed. The bottom of 123, 5 lines. If we now ask, underlined we, Heidegger that is, and us if we can understand him, and perhaps must ask, what this unconcealedness itself is, then our inquiry cannot be. That's the question they didn't ask. If maybe by the end of today I'll get there, and if I don't, certainly beginning next time. But by the way, that's the best statement of that. I keep reminding you, he really is clear about this stuff on 178 and 179. That part in the appendix I think you can read. If we now ask, and perhaps must ask, what this unconcealedness itself is, then our inquiry cannot be a mere making up for an omission. Then what must it be? If it is to be the preparation for the occurrence of something not yet to come, what must our questioning be at least and at first, and indeed by necessity? It must again be a necessity and even again a beginning, but a different one. I mean, there's one of those important hints that by coming back to the beginning and understanding what the Greeks, pre-Socratics understood, and now understanding what they didn't question, we can begin the whole history of the West all over again. 2,000 years of metaphysics, which got rid of gods, got rid of history, got rid of meaningful differences, ended in what he calls nihilism, I'll read you a quote later, can be ended, and we can start all over again and get it right, if we will do what Heidegger wants us to do, understand him, and of course not just go around reciting what he says. He talks about that, but live it. That's what he's proposing, that all of this is in the service of a new beginning. I mean, this is so important to him, and so sort of megalomaniac state that he's in, that he's going to save the West. But it's so scattered around that I just have to focus us on it. Whatever they were doing that made them able to see aletheia in the sense of physis, of beings coming into unconcealment, while missing the, just parentheses, the clearing, which made it possible for there to be physis. That's what we'll come back to. But we're focusing now on what they did see for the rest of today, probably. What made them able to do this was certainly not some conscious choice. This is exactly where we were last time. Remember that what's necessary is something that you can't have a grip on and stand back and decide about. It's like earth. It's something that grabs you, and we're now going to talk about what grabbed them. Well, earth is very much related to moods. Moods are something that you can't get hold of, you can't control. In Being in Time, Heidegger says you can't get behind your moods, you can't understand what caused them, and you can't change them. And not only do people have moods, but cultures have basic moods. And what he wants to know now is what was the basic mood of the pre-Socratic Greeks, which forced them, in effect, but not in a determinist way, but drew them, let us say, drew them to ask this important question about the being of beings, which no culture had ever asked before. And that's the basic mood he's interested in. He talks about it on 122. No, I don't know why I say that. Never mind 122. Well, I better find out, though, somewhere around here there is the story of, I need a phrase about basic moods. It's probably all over the place, but where am I thinking of it? Well, I found something else that's interesting, which might have to do instead on 128. Which it says what I was just saying, that top paragraph. The first task then was to apprehend, that was for the pre-Socratics. What was their job? To apprehend beings as beings, to install the pure recognition of beings as such and nothing more. This was quite enough if we consider what was simultaneously grounded with it, the primordial determination of man as that being which in the midst of beings as a whole, that's the crucial thing. All human beings are in the midst of beings. But in the midst of beings, so to speak, as beings, lets beings hold sway in their unconcealedness. This letting hold sway is accomplished by exhibiting beings. Let's see if we're going to read any more. Well, we might as well, because it's a summary of the origin of the work of art. This letting hold sway is accomplished by exhibiting beings in their forms and modes of presence, and by preserving beings therein. Occurrences in which poetry, as well as painting and sculpture, the act that founds a state, the worshipping of the gods, first attain their essence, bringing these essences into being historically and as history by their words and actions and so forth. Okay, now I wish I could still find this basic mood. It's in chapter 5, so we should get over there. It should be very near the beginning of chapter 5. Well, we're going to hear so much about it that the fact that I can't find it now doesn't matter. We'll come across it everywhere. So there is a basic mood in the culture. And now we have to stop and talk about mood for a while. Because there are all kinds of and this is disposition, by the way. You might have all been looking, well, let's talk about one place is 133. As soon as I call it disposition, I start seeing it. The name of section 36, the need of primordial thinking, and how this need compels man dispositionally into the basic disposition of wonder. So that's how it puts man moodily, so to speak, into the basic mood of wonder. So let's talk about moods. Well, he's worried, and rightly, that people will just misunderstand the whole idea of dispositions or moods. By the way, I'm going to call them moods. They are, the German word is Stimmung, which is mood. Disposition is the rather strange translation. Yeah?
I'm just wondering if would the market be difference between mood and mode would be...
Mood and what?
Mode.
Mode. Well, it's interesting, mode in the sense of mode in music, or mode in the sense of way of doing something.
Mode in being.
I see. I don't know mode in being, but I know mode in music, and it's very close to that, because he in German, Stimmung, the word for mood, and Gestimmtheit, attunement, right? I don't know if anybody knows that. So an attunement is all tied up with the well-tempered clavier is got the right, correctly attuned. So a mood is an attunement, and that's very important for him. And it does have all kinds of musical overtones. And what is it? Well, to be in a mood is to have a certain coloring of your at least local world. I think I may have said once, his only time I know where he gives an example is the mood at a party. And he says, well, a party has a certain mood, and it's not the mood of each individual in the party. The whole party has a mood, and anybody who comes into the party catches that mood. And there's a recent book talking about the contagion of moods. It's apparently becoming suddenly a hot subject in philosophy, contagion is a funny way to put it, but Heidegger wouldn't mind. And it's called Contagion of Emotions, this book. But I think what it's really talking about, I haven't read it, I just saw the title, but I get the impression that people are beginning to realize that both for individuals and for situations and for maybe cultures, at least groups, that there is something like these basic moods or attunements, and that they are contagious. Another person who knows it, by the way, how many read The Possessed? I know two people who thought about this, and so not very often. Dostoevsky talks every once in a while about the mood in the town in The Possessed, and it's like the mood at the party, only bigger, and the town is all anxious at some point, and they're all relieved at another point, and then they're restless at another point. The whole town has these different moods. Another place which you never will have read it, I'm sure, is the book that was popular about maybe 10 years ago called The Soul of the New Machine. Has anybody ever heard of it? It's about the making of what do you call it? Well, an operating system, and the team that made the operating system. But it's very influenced by Heidegger. I don't know if Tracy Kidd or the author, whether they ever read Heidegger. But the guy who runs this team is constantly sort of sensitive to the mood in the room and doing things to try to control the mood in the room. I don't know whether Heidegger would say you can't do much about it, but he does things like, if you could do anything about it, you could tell people stories of the history of their situation, which is what this guy does. Tells them the narrative of their identity, tries to keep them from being discouraged and making them feel as if they are the special preservers of this way of making operating systems. So there's some sensitivity to this out in the world, but very little in our world. So on 134, Heidegger's talking about how it colors the whole world. In each case, in each different mood, the world is brought to man in a different way. In each case, his self is differently opened up and resolved with regard to beings. And immediately he starts to say, but you don't want to understand this biologically or psychologically. I mean, biologically, you can well believe, and he wouldn't have to deny, that if you take Zoloft, it'll change your mood. But what the Zoloft does to your neural transmitters is not your mood. Your mood is that your world will look different to you. And does that mean then that you get a private experience when you take some mood-controlling drug, and then you project that on the world? Heidegger would say, no, that's very Cartesian. We have no experience of this inner thing called this mood, which we then project on everything. Our world just looks different, has a different coloring. It's neither good physiology, or what he calls biology. It's not good neurophysiology, and it's not good psychology. And it's bad phenomenology to think that moods are something in us which we then project on the world. Well, of course, if you think the world is just a kind of colorless universe, the way Galileo started and Descartes did, then you have to think that somehow moods are projected on it. But if you think, if you think the world is this in which we live, like Heidegger does doing phenomenology, and he would say Descartes was talking about the universe. Moods, if universe was colored, you'd have to project moods on it. But the universe doesn't have any color. And the world is colored by some mood, all right, but it's not a blank thing like the universe. You're always already in the world, and it's always already showing up with some coloration, looking bright, looking gray. He doesn't say coloration, but I need some word for the attunement. That it's always tuned a certain way. And he's talking about this on 134. He's saying it's not psychological. That is, to put it, it's not the two things that he doesn't like, the Cartesian things. It's not what they keep calling a lived experience in here. It's a funny, they have a problem. And I don't know, maybe the only way to translate it is lived experience. They've got the word Erlebnis, and they've got the word Erfahrung. That is, Germans have. And we have only one word, experience. They want something like private, inner, something or other, and public, shared, something or other. And we can say we're all having the experience of the Heidegger lecture. That's this one. And we can also say, when maybe you're also having pains and tickles and maybe your own private stuff. There's not much of this. Only philosophers, Cartesian philosophers, think there's all this Erlebnis going on. Heidegger thinks nothing interesting is inner except sort of garbage and dreams. But if you've only got two categories, subjective, which is private experience, and objective, which is this universe, then you think that moods are private experiences and that they are somehow projected on the universe. And he wants to say, no, that's not it at all. It's not a private lived experience. See if I want to read anything. I don't see where he says that right now, but he does. And then he says something a little harder to understand, which I do want to read you. You could say at least this much so far, though he doesn't, that moods aren't in us. We get in a mood. I mean, in a little bit of that, I mean, in ordinary English, it's still there. If moods were Leibniz's, they'd be in us. That if they color our whole world, then we're in a mood. But he has a much more interesting and stronger claim. He wants to say we shouldn't even that we are transported into this or that mood. He says that's wrong on the middle of the first paragraph on 134. We sometimes say we've been transported into this or that mood. Well, that sounds pretty good. Why not? Then we'd be, once we've been transported into it, we'd be in it. That's good, not in us. Why is he complaining about that? In truth, that he says, understood on the basis of the original essence of being, it is rather the reverse. It is the disposition, that is the mood, that transports us into this or that basic relation to beings as such. Okay, I think that has two components there that he's got. One, he wants to say, the mood is what draws us in. It isn't some third thing that transports us into the mood. It's the very nature of moods to draw us into them. And that's why it's a bit misleading to say that we got transported into them as if they were sort of sitting there and then something dumped us into them. That's certainly good phenomenology. When you go to the party, it isn't as if you get sort of transferred into this mood. This mood grabs you and draws you in. But he wants to make an even stronger claim. For really interesting moods, they change you in your world when they draw you in. It's not quite the same you and the same world. So it isn't as if you're the same you, here you are, and then you're transported over here. It's that here you are, and you are drawn in such a way that you get changed from, say, being a bored and unhappy person into being a hilarious person. Let's say you're lucky at this party, and your world gets changed from a gray world to a bright world. All that happens. He says it's the mood that transports us into this or that basic relation to beings as such. Well, at the party, your basic relation, let's say, is to find them all fun. More precisely, mood is what transports us in such a way that it co-founds the space-time of the transporting itself. I mean, I don't know exactly what that means, but I think that means it transports us in such a way that it determines the us and the world that it transports us into. If it doesn't mean that, I don't know what it does mean. So it displaces us, and then we get that funny translation on 40 that Forrest rightly worries about. All this about how mood will displace us at the top of 140. The wrong view is that at the top we are displaced into these or those dispositions by getting them. In truth, however, it's the disposition, the mood, that displaces us. He's come back to the same point. But now we've got to worry about displaces us into such and such a relation to the world. Now, just instead of displaces, I think you should use transform, and then you'll get the point I've just been making. In truth, it's the disposition that transforms us into such and such a relation to the world, into this or that understanding of the world, into such and such a resolve or a collusion of ourself. We're changing too. A self that is essentially being in the world. So I think that's what so mood isn't inner, and it isn't something that you have to be pushed into. It pulls you in, and it doesn't leave you and your world unchanged. It is precisely a change of you and a change of your world. And the early Greeks, he says at one point, understood this, and because their gods were like moods. He says a lot about this in the Parmenides Lectures, a different book. I mean, so when Aphrodite shows up, then everything is seen in the light of, everything looks erotic or uninteresting. And then people feel different and the world looks different, and in Homer, Helen runs off with this exciting stranger from Troy, and because that's the kind of person she becomes, and that's the kind of world she's in when Aphrodite is there shining on them. And he says you can't understand the Greek gods if you don't understand a world in which people realize that moods were extremely unprivate, that is, they structured the situation, and that they were extremely important, and that they had nothing to do with people choosing anything. Because when Helen finally comes back after 10 years at Troy to her former husband and child, they don't blame her. They just say, well, that's what happens when Aphrodite comes around. I mean, so they're a kind of culture that has a tremendous appreciation, Heidegger thinks, of this mood. And in the extremist sort of mood, which he's interested in, when the whole I don't know what to say, culture, I guess it's culture, whatever you call this bunch of people, the pre-Socratics, when they get into a certain mood, then everything changes in the culture. That you have this big displacement or transformation. This is the second sentence in third sentence in the section 2 on 139. By this displacement, this is now we're talking about this particular one, which is going to be the one that he's interested in, this very original, important, global one. And I'm going to read transformation. But this transformation, however, man does not simply pass unchanged from a previous place to a new one. Remember, I'm saying that displacement really means now that the human beings are going to change, and the world they're in is going to change. So by this transformation, man doesn't simply pass unchanged from a previous place to a new one, as if man were a thing that can be shifted from one place to another. That's why displacement is such a bad word. Instead, this transformation places man, for the first time, into the decision of the most decisive relations to beings and non-beings. Where decision, by the way, can't mean sort of standing outside and willfully making a decision. The decision gets made sort of for the human beings, by drawing them into this way of looking at things. I think it's a decision in the sense that it was one way, and now it's another way. And in that sense, it's a decision. Something very different came about. Don't hear in decision the kind of, you stand outside and you look at the alternatives and you chose this alternative and now you choose this alternative. Yeah.
But isn't there also something about them taking it up?
Yes.
Rather than, so in that...
Right. They're not just pushed into it. That's right. They're drawn into it, but they accept it. It's sort of like the party again. You can either get into it, or you can resist it and try to be glum and keep thinking thoughts about how people are supposed to be home doing their homework and what are they doing here, or you can really get into it. And they got into it. That much of it is the decision. Okay, yes. Let me see. So they got this new decision. That is, they let themselves be drawn into this new way of relating to beings and non-beings. And these relations bestow on him, that is, the pre-Socratic people, the foundation of a new essence. That's how transforming it is. This need transforms man into the beginning of the foundation of his essence. That is, interestingly enough, it's wonderful he corrects this. I mean, that doesn't mean that human beings get their essence once and for all human beings. It doesn't even mean that human beings get their essence once and for all in the West. Although it's been our essence for 2,000 years, he says, I say advisedly a foundation, for we can never say that it's the absolute one. Meaning, who knows? I mean, there are human beings in Bali and in Japan who've got different essences, and we might get a different essence. And it might be for the good and it might be for the bad, but what happened here in 500 BC defined the historical essence of human beings in the West from then to now. That much he's quite sure. So now, maybe we should stop and see if there are any questions, because now we're going to go into this weird and deep thing, which is lots of fun, though, as I said to Liz, I'm not sure what finally you get out of the fun, but I'm going to tell you his views about wonder, which are certainly interesting and difficult and unscrambleable, finally. But anybody want to, are you with it so far? Yeah, John. Okay, go ahead over here. Yeah.
Clarification. I'm not sure how decision fits in there. I know you covered it, but it's...
Okay, well, we went fast, Liz and I sort of ping-ponged back and forth. I said it wasn't a decision where you just stood outside and chose between alternatives, because you were pulled into it and you become different in the course of it. There isn't any you standing outside it isn't like me deciding whether to have a hot fudge sundae or banana split, where I don't change and where that I can. Okay, so I made it look as if there was nothing for you to do. You just got zapped into it, and then Liz said, no, you can either sort of swing with it and be open to it, or you can resist it. And the decision is that you are pulled into it and accept being pulled into it wholeheartedly. Something like that. Is that what you think? Is that all right?
I just wonder what hinges upon your acceptance or non-acceptance, and why use those kinds of intentional terms.
Well, Liz, now you'll see what you've got me into. What hinges on it?
What hinges on there being any sort of role for the self at all?
What's the play between
Okay.
passivity and activity?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, do you have an answer? I mean, why shouldn't we just say people are just zapped into it? Why should it be some role? Well, Forrest,
Well,
yeah.
you should say.
We shouldn't have said that they have any role about resisting it or
the
getting
role
into it.
is, the role is the suffering. That is the role. It's this light in which you're going to get
Okay,
around.
accepting it, acknowledging it, that's all right.
Undergoing it.
Undergoing it.
Is, and it's
Okay.
it isn't so much decision as
Okay.
it is decisive.
Okay, that's right. It's decisive
Right.
that you let it happen and undergo it. Don't resist it and deny it. Okay, that's all. Because then you could try to sort of pull yourself away from it, but the Greeks they let it happen to them.
But it
They
is
suffered
compelling,
it.
remember.
What?
You can't, it is compelling.
That's right. It's
Yeah.
drawing them in. You haven't
Yeah,
got any
yeah,
choice.
yeah.
So maybe we shouldn't. Maybe I should have stuck with my let drawing in story.
Well, I mean, there are two things I want to say. One, phenomenologically, it seems as if moods are not inevitable. I mean, or that there is this kind of, there needs to be this kind of acceptance.
You can
So-
resist them to some extent.
Right. I think that's
Right.
I think
Only by Heidegger says in Being and Time, you can resist them, if at all, only by conjuring up another mood
Yeah.
that will go against
Yeah.
it. So at the party you can
Yeah.
keep getting yourself into the mood
Yeah.
of being scared
and
of
it's not like you
the
can select
future exam or
some,
something.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just wanted to
Yeah.
connect to origin of the work of art in the sense of I like the idea of decisiveness, because if mood is what structures your very experience, what sets up a being or the essence of a being, it seems to be very related to the idea of the kind of essence of this kind of being, the Greek experience versus
Good.
the modern or something like this.
I like decisive too. That's what I was trying to get at. Very helpful. It's not a choice. This kind of decision, something decisive happens to you, and you are pretty much all you can do is either wholeheartedly suffer it or try to struggle out of it. But in fact, there's not really much choice there. Either you wholeheartedly suffer it or you don't have. Well, there's not much leeway, I think.
Let me
Yeah.
say it this way. That becomes the mood that you're in, right? And the question is whether you accept that and take that up, or whether you resist that.
Okay, but you don't have much. Yeah.
In virtue of what can you accept or resist it? That's what I'm.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, you guys were really
If you're
pushing
always-
good.
You're always already thrown into it.
Yeah, and you can't get behind it. You can't get outside of it. And yet, I mean, I'm not sure it's important to Heidegger, but there is Liz has a certain phenomenology behind her. I mean, there's a difference between sort of wholeheartedly plunging into the mood and dragging your feet. But it doesn't see. In virtue of what would you drag your feet? You're asking. I don't know. Go
I
ahead.
guess what I'm interested in knowing is that from my sense of the phenomenology, it doesn't make sense that we can talk of having any choice over
Any choice. Well, particularly.
But what I would like to explain is why we do get this feeling that we do have a choice.
Okay.
So therefore,
Say something. Yeah.
That's
You
what-
want to? I see. Well,
why we have that.
I'm going to back off it. I think when it's a global enough mood, and then we're talking here about such a global mood, there isn't any purchase for dragging in a different mood to counteract it. When you're in a mood at the party, you have a chance of resisting it by thinking about the mood you're going to be in at the exam next day. But when it's a mood that colors everything that you can imagine in the future, in the past, and at home and at work, because it's a global mood, which this is supposed to be, when it, what beings as such are in it, and every being, maybe you can't resist it, and maybe you just have to suffer it.
Okay, then let me. First, then it starts to sound like the mood is a thing. We don't need to go over to this other way of thinking, but it sounds like the mood is I don't know, has a kind of force and agency attached to it,
Mhm.
right? Whereas that doesn't seem right to me. I know we need to avoid that other
Well,
extreme, right?
yes, but I mean, you need to have some way of talking about the fact that the mood at the party does sort of grab you and push you around, and yet it isn't a thing, and it
Yeah,
doesn't have
no,
a will,
yeah,
right?
right.
But otherwise, can we just
And then I also
yeah?
want to say, but something happened, right? It's
Right.
not just that, I mean, and this makes it look like as if the sort of mood was always there already, and then you got pulled into it too.
Well, no, that's completely mysterious. There wasn't. I mean, for a while there. I mean, in most cultures, and up to a certain point in the Greek culture, there wasn't this mood, and then there was. And he says we can't give any causal story about that. That goes back to being in time. A mood just hits you. Here you were all elated, and all of a sudden you're depressed, and there's no story about that. And but that's not. Again, that's not up to you. I mean, again, I think the general sort of resistance to anything. I think in this case we should just say, moods draw you in. You can suffer them. In some cases you can resist them, like the party example. But when it's the global mood of the whole culture that comes around, I don't think you can. The Greeks seem to have been forced by the mood. But we should look at the text.
Yeah.
Keep your eyes open. And maybe there's a paper topic in there, but I doubt it. I think there's just an answer.
Bigger issues there.
Okay, yeah.
Well, what's so compelling is that these Grundbestimmungen that he's talking about are global in the sense that it refers to beings as a whole.
That's what I was saying,
Not
yes.
just the party. I mean,
Right.
I don't even think you can get over to the party. You've got to go to the library.
Yeah.
Then there's a different...
Okay, good. So you get out of this by going somewhere else. This is what I was getting at, but
You
Forrest
can't
is
go
putting it
anywhere
clearly.
else.
You can't go anywhere else if it's the mood for beings as such. And then you really just have to suffer it. I think, unless Liz isn't happy with that, but I leave you guys to fight it
Well,
out.
it's hard for you.
Everybody can look for themselves. Yeah, Dan.
What's the difference between what these Grundbestimmungen, like these essential moods, and understanding of behavior?
Well, not much. Very sensible. By the way, let's get our vocabularies sort of, what in German it's Gleichschaltung. I don't know why I'm thinking in German. Coordinated or something. That is, the thing that gets translated basic disposition. You just said essential mood. We just need some, let's not say essential because we got enough loaded on that word. So fundamental mood is, I think, if I can, I'm going to stick to that. Is that what you say?
Ground mood, fundamental.
Yeah, Grundbestimmung in German, but ground mood is not too good in English. So let's say fundamental mood. Okay, what's the difference between the fundamental mood and an understanding of being? Only this, and this fascinating, good question. If the understanding of being is roughly, remember, the style of the culture, the way I understand it, then mood is, and I'm just drawing on being and time, there's going to be two aspects to this style. One is it's going to determine your way of dealing with things, coping with things. It's going to, let's go back to when Aphrodite comes. I mean, then Helen is going to run off. That's a way of coping with the situation. And it's going to color everything and determine what matters. A style has both the mattering aspect and the coping aspect. And so we've been hearing a lot about the sort of the overall way you behave if you're in a technological style or if you're in a medieval creature style. Now we're switching and we're thinking, and what is this overall mattering that you would have if you were in a technological, which turns out to be frantic disorientation. I mean, a feeling of feeling is bad, a mood of frantic disorientation. And we both sides there, yeah.
What would you make of my assertion that in middle Heidegger, moods are more fundamental than understanding?
I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay.
It's interesting that in Being in Time it's the reverse.
Yes.
And I wouldn't
Except
be...
in Division 2 where...
Well, even, I mean, we can't go into this much, but,
Yeah.
but remember the future is always primary in Being in Time. And it now looks like the past is primary in this book, in the sense that the mood that the culture was in from before the beginning, at the beginning, is making this big difference all the way along, and it looks like, therefore, the past which is in Heidegger associated with the mood side, is the most fundamental. I wouldn't be surprised.
And yet this past is coming towards us from the future.
Yes, but
In
it's
the
the past. It's the past that's coming toward us from the future,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And that means that this fundamental disposition is about as fundamental as you can get. And I think that's not surprising for this stage. Yeah, Beatrice.
I'm just puzzled by something you said, which sounds right to me, that moods are very much connected to earth. But all the examples that we've used connect moods to world, in fact. And in being and time, it's also an extension. So, which link it to world. So, what would the how can we get out of that? What would the connection be between mood and earth, which would be so specific?
Boris, you want to say something about that?
Well, first of all, being in time, it's not that moods are an existential, it is having a mood that's existential. It's the Findigkeit that's the existential, not Stimmel.
Okay,
That's for sure. And I think they are earthy in the sense that from my point of view, you can't get in them, you can't get out of them.
Can't get behind them.
You can't get behind them, you can't rationalize them, you can't control them, you can't master them. If there's anything earthy, that's it.
Yeah, I think the non-master is a very important part of it. Yeah, I mean, and he talks about this in a footnote in The Essence of Reasons, where he brings together, when he talks about earthiness, and he talks about mood there, and something, and this is just going to confuse you, but that mood comes in as something that is radically other at that point. Moods are more other than anything else, in the sense of out of our control and out of our understanding. And that, though he hasn't got a notion of earth in being in time, if he had, that's where it would go, I think. Yeah.
But I'm a little bit worried that that makes it sound as if we can totally understand worlds.
Indeed.
In general. I
Okay.
mean,
Oh, you mean that it is transparent?
It's an illusion where it's easy for us to fall into.
Yeah.
That world is transparent
okay.
to us.
Well, world never gets to be transparent, but we move toward transparent. It's that function of trying to make it transparent, which brings out the limits.
Yes.
Okay, I think that's all okay. Yeah, let's go on. I mean, those are all. I'm so glad I stopped for questions, and the moral is, because I might have just gone on and we never would have had this discussion, but we have had, and now that's good. So, where are we? We're ready to go back to the first mood. Okay, the fundamental mood of wonder. It's funny, in answer to Dan's question, the next sentence in my lecture notes is, epochs in the history of the understanding of being not only have a style, but every style has a mood. And that's what we've just been talking about. Yeah.
So what was fundamental mood then, in contrast to?
Okay, the fundamental mood we're talking about now is wonder. It's the mood that started the history of the West.
Well, how is it different from the understanding of being?
It's more fundamental even than the understanding of being. This is what Forrest was pointing out, in the sense that it's because of this mood, or sort of in the light of this mood or something, that we got an understanding of being, namely that the being of all beings became something that we were attuned to. It's that fundamental. You'll see, but that's where we are. And so now we hear that somehow the pre-Socratic Greeks were in some kind of distress, which in a way, and this is very interesting and tricky, was wonder, and in another way, the response to this distress was wonder. I think at first it's easier to think of it as a distress that isn't wonder, and then one can see that it's already almost like wonder. So let's say they're in a distress, and this distress is that there they are in the midst of beings, and they can't get out of it and they can't get into it. This weird phrase. Everything depends on making sense of this weird phrase. I now understand that, and you will too if you read it, that he uses such weird talk because he wants to describe with the same words what it's like before you let yourself experience wonder or get pulled into wonder, suffer wonder, is, before that, the distress that leads you to suffer wonder is that you can't get into beings and you can't get out of them. And after that, when you're in wonder, you're still in a situation where you can't get into beings and you can't get out of them. But I don't think it's distress anymore. I think it's as if it's a very funny Gestalt switch where the same experience, which is distress and you can't get into things and you can't get out of them, when you take it a certain way or when it takes you a certain way, then becomes something that you can, that is positive, and opens up a whole possibility of a history. Yeah.
I don't think you can be in the midst of beings in his sense.
Yeah.
In his sense, apart from the mood.
Okay, well then you're not quite in the midst of beings. Well, yes you can, but not qua beings.
Well, that's exactly what I mean.
Okay.
Obviously,
Yeah. You're in the midst of beings, but they are not qua
bringing
beings.
it up because
Right.
the mood gives you this.
That's right.
Now know.
That's right. The
Yeah.
mood gives you the beings qua beings.
Yeah.
So here you are, first anyway. You're just there. I'll start now on 132. And it's the very hard second paragraph. The need we have in mind arises from the distress of not knowing the way out or the way in. But that is by no means to be understood as a perplexity in some particular circumstance or other. What is it then? Not knowing the way out or the way in, that is to say, out of and into that which such knowing first opens up. See, this is the funny part, as an untrodden and ungrounded space. This space, that means in a way the whole world, if we may so to speak of it here, is that between where it has not yet been determined what being is or what non-being is, though where by the same token a total confusion and undifferentiating of beings and non-beings does not sweep everything away either. Now, I'm going to give you a whole lot of strange descriptions like that, because he does, and then I'm going to try to tell you what I think the phenomenon is, but you have to decide for yourself whether this is the right thing. It turns out, now, at this point there is still no understanding of beings as a whole, to jump to what Forrest was saying, and that's right. The third paragraph on 134. This distress, the not knowing the way in and the way out and the way in, does not simply compel us into already determined relations to beings. One's already opened up and interpreted in their beingness. That would be beings as a whole. On the contrary, it compels us first of all into that between, that in the midst of, in which space and time, in whose space and time beings as a whole can be determined in their beingness. So there isn't yet being as a whole and being in their beingness, but this mood, this fundamental mood, gets us into this way of experiencing things. Now, how can this be? Well, wonder pushes us, he says, into the experience of being in their beingness on 132 at the bottom. This distress explodes beings, still veiled as such, in order to make the space of the in the midst of beings able to be occupied and founded as a possible standpoint of man. This distress, here barely intimated by speaking of it as a not knowing the way in and the way out, is the casting asunder of what will be determined forthwith as beings in their beingness over against non-being. Now, I'm just giving you all the quotes where you have to make sense of all this. It enables us to name being for the first time, he says next, skipping just a little in the middle of the next paragraph. Thinking means here to let beings emerge in the decisiveness of their being and to let them stand out before oneself, to perceive them as such, and to name them in their beingness for the first time. So they haven't done that yet. Wonder is this distress is going to, in a way, push them into doing all that. Wonder is the only way out of this distress. That's not, better not say way out, because there's no way out.
But they're not going to have any distress unless they want to.
That I disagree with.
Okay.
I think that distress splits over into wonder, but that once you can't have wonder unless you have distress. But I don't buy the biconditional. I do think you can have distress, and then you get wonder And wonder is a certain way of taking the distress. Maybe we're disagreeing and maybe we're not. Let's wait and see. So I think wonder is the way out of the distress. Now, how is that? Well, the only way to figure out what to think about all this is to try to figure out what the phenomenon is. That's sure. But boy, is this, I mean, that's a job I give myself all the time, and I'm happy to take this job, but this is the hardest job I could ever have. Because how do you figure out what the phenomenon is? You can't get back to it. We lost touch with it, he said. It was a leap into our history, which then we gradually, not so, pretty quickly, by the time we got to Aristotle, the culture had already lost it. And then I could say, well, let's find it in the marginal practices. I mean, after all, there's still moods at parties and stuff. But the trouble is, this mood is a global mood. It's essentially a global mood. You couldn't possibly find it in your marginal practices because you can't have marginal global practices. So that it's a mood for all beings in all time, space. We don't have it. How do we get any access to it? Well, I think Heidegger's just trying to make up some story about what it must have been like. And I'll tell you what I think his story is. And the clue is this business of what he means by not being able to get out and not being able to get in. I take it that people are already in the midst of beings, though they don't know. This is what they're in. And that is, I think, well, people were already people insofar as they already had language. So I think they were probably already, in my account, experiencing things as something. Not all things as the same something. But you'll see what I mean in a bit. But I mean, you can experience something as a house and something as a tree without experiencing them both as created. So they were experiencing particular things as something, but they didn't have any sense yet of beings as a whole. But they were in the midst of beings anyway. That's what I think is going on 139. Well, I don't know. And on the 139 passage might be more in the direction of forest. I don't know yet. Let's see. The whence and whither, I'm at the bottom. The whence and whither exists no less than the open between in which beings and non-beings stand forth as a whole, though still in their undifferentiatedness. See, that's the peculiar thing.
But that's indecisiveness.
Yes, I know. Something hasn't been decided. All this undifferentiatedness in German is undecidedness. Since the between is the whole of these undecided beings, there is nothing outside to which an exit could be possible. And because it is a whole, it is undifferentiated, undecided. Whatever's undecided about it, there is nothing. Okay, so what's happening here? I want.
Undecided is the difference between beings and non-beings.
Yeah. Some general characteristic of it is undecided, which gives us this general difference between beings and non-beings. And okay, now let's go on with that.
Could you repeat that?
What?
Could you repeat that?
Okay, what's undecided is some general way of relating to all these beings that we're in the midst of, which gives us a distinction between beings and non-beings, which means what's undecided yet is what they are as a whole. Okay, good, we agree about that. So that's the sense in which they are already in it. They're in it, they're in beings as a whole, but they don't know what they are as a whole. I think is not just, and so they have no standpoint yet. Where does he say that? On 138.
And that's distressing.
Yeah, that's distressing, all right. They have no standpoint from which to understand these beings as a whole. They just there, and that's distressing. Okay. Now, what does that look like? Well, okay, here's my guess at the phenomenon. Try to feel it like this. There was no way to get in tune with what was going on. They had no unified sense of orientation. They had no familiarity, general familiarity, that enabled them to find their way about in the world as if it was one world. My code for this is that they were disoriented and overwhelmed. What would that look like? Well, maybe like this, that things were showing up for them sometimes as familiar, sometimes as mysterious, sometimes threatening, sometimes useful, and then sacred, and then marvelous, and then admirable, and then erotic. Gods were whooshing up, and things were coming up, and when Aphrodite whooshed up, they looked erotic, and then Ares looked up, and everything looked whooshed up, and everything looked aggressive, and there was no, you wouldn't know what god was going to come up next, and how everything was going to look next, and that would be disorienting and overwhelming. And I think this is what it means to say that there wasn't a lack, but an unbearable excess or surplus. That is, there were just too many ways that everything was showing up as, for them to get a grip on it. Maybe. I mean, I'll tell you, on 133, that should be an excess place, is it? Or surplus?
Yeah, it's the second paragraph above the new section.
Oh yeah, here it is. The distress, the not knowing one way about, or the way in the midst of itself, the way into the in the midst itself ungrounded, of still undifferentiated beings and non-beings. That is, we don't know what everything is, and everything is, so that we can tell what isn't. Is not a lack and not a deprivation, but is the surplus of a gift which, however, is more difficult to bear than any loss. So the distress, I take it, is that everything is, there's just too many ways everything is showing up. On 139, it comes back again, this surplus, excess, about 15 lines down. This distress of not knowing the way out or the way in, this need has an excess, which raises it above every lack, and lets something be which we have to express as the opposite of a lack, an abundance. And I'm trying to say how abundance could be distressing, and now I think it's because there's just too many ways everything can show up. And it's all so unstable, as he says right next. This is the measurelessness of the undifferentiated, that is, undecidedness between what beings as beings are as a whole and what presses forth as inconstant, formless, and carrying away, which means here at the same time what immediately withdraws. So there is, I take that to be, you don't know, you can't decide, you haven't decided yet between something that all beings have and this way that things whoosh up and withdraw. So each time they encounter something, it looks different. And then, and this is the great aha, but go ahead before we have it.
Everything they encounter looks different. Does everything nonetheless whoosh up?
Ah, yes. Oh, you just jumped ahead. Wonderful. You made the move. Suppose then you say, and this is the Gestalt switch, yeah, but now I understand. Everything whooshes up. That's the fundamental characteristic of all beings. And suddenly, the very thing that was keeping you from getting a grip on it gives you a grip on it. You get attuned to what was so disorienting and overwhelming and distressing when you realize that the difference between beings and non-beings is that beings show up. Whoosh up. That and physis. Suddenly, physis gives you the name for and some attunement to and some grip on what was just disconcerting before. So well, anyway, let me go on. That's my story. The aha is that they get attuned to the way things are. They understand that everything is welling up, drawing them in, overwhelming them. And then they can relate to everything in them, to themselves, as the beings for whom things whoosh up and overwhelm and so forth. On 139. And there's a very murky sentence because all the undifferentiateds were really undecideds and so forth. So let's skip that sentence and two sentences and go to the third in section 2 on 139. By this displacement, however, man does not simply pass unchanged from a previous place to a new one. This is transformation. As if man were a thing that can be shifted from one place to another. This displaces man for the first time in the decision. Oh, I've read that. And gives him a new essence. I don't need to read that. Well, we want to know what this new essence is. Let's try 146. It's about 5 lines down. In this transition, that's the transformation, the most unusual first steps forth separately in its unusualness and in its usualness and in its unusualness, such that these then appear precisely as such. In this way, wonder opens up what alone is wondrous in it, namely the whole as a whole, and the whole as beings, beings as a whole, that they are, and that they are, and what they are, beings as beings, ends qua ends. What is meant here is the as, so forth, the between, that wonder separates out, the open of a free space, hardly surmised and heated, in which beings come into play as such, namely as beings that are in play, in the play of their being. All of this is the new basic mood. A great description of it. I was going to read it, and I wasn't going to read it. I think I will read it, because you can get a feeling, if you read this one, it's in the Age of the World picture. You're going to read it soon, on page 131. It's a description of physis, which is better than any description in here. This is written 2 years later anyway, which you could see as a disorienting and overwhelming sort of distress, or as a kind of challenge for which you should be grateful. And wonder is something like this. What is wonder? Well, I think it's a kind of gratitude in the face of what is in excess and surplus, in such a way that you can, when you discover you can cope with it. Anyway, here's what physis is, he says. That which is that which arises and opens itself, which as what presences comes upon man as the one who presences. That which is does not come into being at all through the fact that man looks upon it. Rather, man is the one looked upon. He is the one who is gathered toward presencing. And now comes the crucial phrase, to be beheld by it, to be included and maintained within its openness, and in that way to be borne along by it, to be driven about by its oppositions and marked by its discord. So still the sort of disorienting stuff is in there, the oppositions and the discord, but all of that is now part of an understanding of being, and that's what physis is, and now they've got a job. So it gives them a new way of relating to everything and to themselves. Let's see if I have another way to put this. I've read that. Okay, a new basic mood, wonder. Now, the sense of being overwhelmed, that's what I just read. They're still overwhelmed, but they're not disoriented. My slogan is, the constant thing is they're overwhelmed. That's what it is to be a pre-Socratic Greek. But instead of being overwhelmed in a way that is disorienting and distressing, they're now overwhelmed in a way that is not disorienting and distressing, but wonderful, and for which they feel gratitude, and they know their job. What happens is a sort, here I wrote, a wow with gratitude, and all this showing up. That everything is presencing. Isn't that great? Now we know what to do, and that means that wonder has opened up a new space for them. This is on 146 at G. Wonder is the casting asunder of this free space, such as at the same time it displaces the wonder into the midst of what was cast apart. Wondering man is the one moved by wonder, displaced, that is transformed by this fundamental mood into an essence determined by it. Wonder transforms man out of the confusing irresolvability of the usual and the unusual into the first resolution of his essence. So what confusing is what I've got is disoriented. They stop being confused, they stop being disoriented, because they've got this new way of taking what's happening. Or it isn't as if they decided to take things in a new way. Things start showing up for them in this way where they can experience it as something that they can get in tune with. Now, let's see. And I say sum it up on page 150, so let's try to sum it up on page 150. The bottom, about 20 lines. Now, he's still going to say it doesn't give you a way in and a way out. That helps make it difficult. I'm going to have to stop with this. But wonder does not permit a way out, And what does that mean is, it's now, you know you're in the midst of beings as beings, and there's no way out, nor a way in, where it turns out that a way in means, if you look a little above that, you can't explain it. Because, of course, no overall mood like Croesus is going to explain anything. That is, you can't, what do I want to say? You can get in tune with it. And in that sense, you've got a way in. But you're always already in, and now you're in tune with it. But you can't give any. You can't. It's not a problem that you can explain anything about. It transforms us before and into the unusualness of everything in its usualness, and so forth. I think I'll stop there, but just give me a second. Okay, 145. That's where he says you can't explain it. That little middle paragraph. I'll stop with that under D. While wonder must venture out into the most extreme unusualness of everything, so everything has now become unusual. It is at the same time cast back wholly on itself, knowing that it is incapable of penetrating the unusualness by way of explanation. Now that's what it means not to be able to get into it. Before it meant, let me just sum it up this way, not being able to get into it when they were in distress meant not being able to get in tune with it. Now they are in tune with it. It's all physis and they're glad. They're more than glad. And